River crossings are among the most dangerous operations in warfare. An army that must cross a river under fire is at its most vulnerable, funneled into narrow crossing points, exposed on open water, unable to maneuver, unable to retreat quickly, and completely dependent on the integrity of whatever bridge or pontoon system carries it across. Military history is filled with catastrophic river crossing failures, armies that were slaughtered while trying to cross, bridges that were destroyed with hundreds of soldiers on them, pontoon systems that collapsed under fire and dumped men and vehicles into the current. Every military academy in the world teaches the river crossing as a case study in vulnerability, and every student who has ever studied it understands the same lesson. The defender who controls the far bank holds the power of life and death over anyone attempting to cross. Days ago, on the Eastern Front in Ukraine, a Russian combined arms battalion learned that lesson in the most brutal way possible. Approximately 400 soldiers, supported by 3 T-72B3 tanks, 6 BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles, and 3 MTLB armored transports, attempted to force a crossing over a river that cuts through the operational area in the eastern sector. Russian combat engineers had worked through the night to construct a pontoon bridge, a floating roadway of interconnected metal sections capable of supporting vehicles up to 50 tons. By dawn, the bridge was complete, stretching approximately 40 meters across the river's muddy, swollen late winter current. The approach roads on the Russian side had been prepared, and the battalion was assembled and ready to cross. On the Ukrainian side of the river, holding a hastily prepared position on a low rise approximately 300 meters from the bridge's western end, was a single Ukrainian platoon, 28 soldiers. Their equipment, 3 FGM-148 Javelin anti-tank missile systems with a total of 7 missiles, 2 PKM machine guns with approximately 4,000 rounds of ammunition, a complement of FPV attack drones, 12 units with shape-charged warheads, controlled by 2 operators, 1 SVD-equipped sniper with a thermal scope, personal rifles and grenades for every soldier, and the kind of grim determination that comes from knowing you are the last line of defense, and there is nothing behind you but open road leading to Ukrainian rear positions. The platoon commander, a 29-year-old lieutenant who had been fighting since the first month of the full-scale invasion, had arrived at the position only 6 hours before the crossing attempt, after receiving an urgent alert from brigade headquarters that Russian engineers were constructing a pontoon bridge. He had no time to prepare elaborate fortifications. His soldiers dug shallow fighting positions in the soft, thawing earth. The late February ground was muddy and yielding, no longer frozen solid but not yet dry, and reinforced them with whatever materials were available. Logs from a nearby tree line, sandbags filled with the damp clay soil, a few sheets of corrugated metal scavenged from a damaged farm building. The positions were crude by the standards of the elaborate Ukrainian defensive works elsewhere on the front, but they were enough. They had to be. The Russian crossing began at approximately 06:45 as gray morning light filtered through low clouds and a light drizzle misted the river valley. The lead vehicle, a T-72B3 tank, rolled onto the pontoon bridge from the eastern bank, its weight causing the floating sections to sink several centimeters into the muddy water. The bridge held. The tank moved slowly, approximately 5 kilometers per hour, the maximum safe speed on a pontoon crossing, its tracks gripping the wet metal surface as it crossed the 40 meters of river. Behind it, a BMP-2 waited on the approach road, its engine running, ready to follow the moment the tank cleared the bridge. The Ukrainian lieutenant watched through binoculars from his position on the rise. He had ordered his men to hold fire until the lead tank was fully across the bridge and on the western bank, close enough that the Javelin's minimum engagement range was not an issue, and positioned where its destruction would not block the bridge itself. He wanted the bridge to remain usable, because every Russian vehicle that crossed the bridge and was destroyed on the western bank was a vehicle that could not retreat, and every vehicle waiting to cross on the eastern bank was a stationary target for his drones. But as the tank reached the midpoint of the bridge, the lieutenant changed his mind. He realized that destroying the tank on the bridge itself would be more valuable. It would block the crossing completely, trapping the remaining Russian vehicles on the wrong side of the river, while turning the bridge into an impassable obstacle. The burning wreck of a 50-ton tank on a pontoon bridge cannot be moved, cannot be driven around, and cannot be cleared without heavy engineering equipment that would itself be vulnerable to Ukrainian fire. He gave the order. The first Javelin operator, positioned in a shallow trench approximately 280 meters from the bridge, acquired the tank in the missile's thermal sight. The CLU display showed the tank clearly, its engine compartment glowing white-hot against the cool gray of the river and the damp bridge surface. The operator selected top attack mode, the Javelin's signature capability in which the missile climbs to altitude and then dives onto the target's thin roof armor, bypassing the thicker frontal and side protection. He pressed the trigger. The Javelin launched with its characteristic two-stage sound. The soft pop of the launch motor ejecting the missile from the tube, followed by the louder ignition of the flight motor as the missile climbed steeply into the overcast sky. The T-72B3's crew had no warning. The missile, approaching from almost directly above, struck the turret roof and penetrated the thin top armor with its tandem charge warhead. The explosion detonated the ammunition in the autoloader. The characteristic catastrophic kill that has destroyed thousands of Russian tanks in this war. The turret launched from the hull, cartwheeling through the drizzle and splashing into the river 30 meters downstream. The hull, now a burning, gutted shell, sat squarely in the center of the pontoon bridge, its weight and the force of the explosion damaging several bridge sections and causing the entire structure to list to one side. The bridge was blocked. No vehicle could pass. The effect on the Russian battalion was immediate and devastating. The BMP-2 that had been waiting to cross slammed on its brakes at the edge of the bridge. Behind it, vehicles stacked up on the approach road. A column of armor and transport vehicles that had been organized for a sequential crossing and was now funneling into a traffic jam on a narrow road with the river on one side and muddy fields on the other. Officers shouted on the radio. Engines revved. Vehicles tried to reverse, colliding with the vehicles behind them. The orderly crossing had become chaos in seconds. Ukrainian FPV drones launched. The two drone operators, positioned behind the platoon's main line, had been waiting for exactly this moment. A mass of stationary vehicles on an approach road with nowhere to go. The first drone descended on the second T-72B3, which was idling approximately 60 meters from the bridge. The shaped charge struck the engine deck and ignited the diesel fuel. The second drone hit a BMP-2 that was attempting a three-point turn on the narrow road, catching it broadside as it turned, penetrating the thin hull armor and detonating inside the troop compartment. Soldiers who had been sitting inside spilled out of the rear hatch, some on fire, some stumbling and falling in the mud. Drone after drone hit the stalled column. A third BMP was struck on its turret. An MTLB caught a drone through its open commander's hatch. The detonation inside the vehicle was devastating, killing the entire crew. A fuel truck that had been positioned near the rear of the column for post-crossing refueling was hit and exploded in a fireball that illuminated the misty morning and set fire to a supply truck parked beside it. While the drones worked the column, the Ukrainian sniper began his own methodical contribution to the battle. Russian combat engineers, recognizing that the bridge was blocked and that the crossing would fail unless the burned-out tank could be removed or the bridge repaired, ran toward the structure with tools and equipment. The sniper, positioned with a clear line of sight to the bridge from approximately 400 meters, engaged them with deliberate, aimed fire. The first engineer fell on the approach to the bridge. A second, who rushed to help him, was hit moments later. A third attempted to reach the bridge from a different angle, crawling along the riverbank. The sniper tracked him through his thermal scope and fired when the engineer raised himself to climb onto the bridge deck. Over the next 2 hours, the sniper engaged 7 engineers and soldiers who attempted to reach the bridge. 5 were confirmed killed, the remaining 2 retreated. Russian forces attempted to respond. The third T-72B3, positioned further back in the column, traversed its turret toward the Ukrainian positions and began firing its main gun. The 125mm shells impacted around the Ukrainian platoon's positions, sending geysers of wet earth and mud into the air and forcing the defenders into the bottoms of their shallow trenches. The tank's coaxial machine gun raked the tree line where the drone operators were positioned. The Ukrainian lieutenant ordered his second Javelin team to engage. The operator, a corporal who had fired Javelins twice before in combat, acquired the tank at approximately 1,800 meters and launched. The missile climbed, dove, and struck the turret roof. The third T-72B3 died the same death as the first. Ammunition detonation, turret launch, burning hull. The Russian column had now lost all three of its tanks. Without tank support, the remaining armored vehicles and infantry were exposed. Javelin missiles, with their 2-kilometer-plus range and top attack capability, could engage any vehicle in the column from the Ukrainian platoon's position. The lieutenant ordered selective Javelin shots against the remaining BMPs, conserving missiles for the highest value targets. 2 more BMPs were destroyed by Javelins over the next hour. The remaining vehicles, realizing that they were trapped in a kill zone with no tank support, no ability to cross the river, and no way to fight back effectively against Javelins firing from beyond the range of their weapons, began abandoning their vehicles and retreating on foot. Russian infantry that had dismounted from their vehicles attempted to advance toward the Ukrainian positions on foot. Approximately 60 soldiers who waded through the muddy fields and tried to close the distance to where the fire was coming from. Ukrainian machine guns engaged them at approximately 500 meters. Long, sweeping bursts that cut through the advancing soldiers as they struggled through the heavy, clinging mud that slowed their movement to a crawl. The damp, thawing ground that had made digging Ukrainian positions easier now became a death trap for advancing Russian infantry. Men sank to their ankles and knees in the soft clay, unable to run, unable to take cover quickly, unable to move faster than a slow walk. The machine guns cut them apart. Mortar rounds, called in by the platoon commander from a Ukrainian mortar team positioned 2 kilometers to the rear, began falling among the infantry, adding shrapnel to the killing. The battle lasted approximately 6 hours, from the first Javelin shot at 0650 to the last Russian withdrawal around 13 Armon. By the end, the river crossing was a scene of devastation visible on Ukrainian drone cameras. A burning tank blocking the pontoon bridge, which was itself listing and partially submerged from the damage. 5 destroyed armored vehicles on the approach road, still smoking. Abandoned vehicles scattered along the road and in the fields. Bodies in the mud. Equipment discarded by fleeing soldiers. A fuel truck still burning, sending a column of black smoke into the gray sky. Losses. Russian losses. 3 T-72B3 tanks destroyed. 7.5 to 9 million. 5 BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles destroyed. 5 to 7.5 million. 2 MTLB armored transports destroyed. 1.4 million. 2 support vehicles destroyed. 200,000, 400,000. Pontoon bridge severely damaged and rendered unusable. $2 million in engineering equipment. Personnel, approximately 80-95 killed and wounded, including multiple engineers and at least 3 vehicle commanders. Total estimated Russian losses, 14.7, 20.3 million. Ukrainian losses, 2 soldiers wounded by tank fire. Both evacuated, both survived. 0 killed. 28 soldiers held the position for 6 hours against a force outnumbering them, approximately 14 to 1. Ammunition expended by the Ukrainian platoon, 5 Javelin missiles, $875,000 total, the most expensive component of the defense. 12 FPV drones, $6,000, Tantrum 400. Approximately 3,500 rounds of machine gun ammunition, approximately 40 mortar rounds called in from supporting positions, 114 sniper rounds. Total Ukrainian expenditure, approximately $950,000 to $1 million. Return on investment, approximately 17 to 1 in material terms. In human terms, 28 defenders against 400 attackers, with 2 Ukrainian wounded against 80 to 95 Russian casualties. The ratio speaks for itself. What this engagement proves: river crossings have been critical moments throughout this war. Early in the invasion, Russia's disastrous attempt to cross the Seversky Donets River in May 2022 became one of the most iconic defeats of the conflict. An entire battalion tactical group destroyed on the banks by Ukrainian artillery, with dozens of vehicles lost and hundreds of soldiers killed. That defeat taught Russian commanders that river crossings require meticulous planning, overwhelming fire support, and air superiority to succeed. Nearly 4 years later, those lessons have apparently been forgotten, or more likely, the Russian military no longer has the resources to apply them. This crossing attempt had none of the elements that doctrine requires. There was no suppressive artillery barrage on the far bank before the crossing began. There was no smokescreen to obscure the bridge from observation. There were no reconnaissance teams sent across in advance to verify that the far bank was clear. There was no air support, no helicopters suppressing Ukrainian positions, no jets providing close air support. There was not even a drone providing overwatch of the crossing area. The Russian battalion simply built a bridge and drove toward it, apparently assuming that the far bank was undefended or that whatever opposition existed could be overwhelmed by the weight of the assault. Instead, they encountered 28 soldiers with javelins and drones. And those 28 soldiers proved more lethal than the artillery battalions and air wings that doctrine says should have preceded the crossing. This is the paradox of modern warfare as practiced in Ukraine. A platoon with precision weapons and the knowledge of how to use them can deliver firepower effects that previously required entire brigades. The Javelin, at $175,000 per missile, is expensive by infantry weapon standards, but each missile destroyed a vehicle worth 20 to 40 times its price and killed a trained crew that took Russia months to produce. The FGM-148's top attack capability, diving onto the thin roof armor that no tank was designed to withstand, makes it arguably the most cost-effective anti-armor weapon in history when measured by kill probability per engagement. In the hands of trained operators who understand the system's capabilities and limitations, it transforms a small infantry unit into a force that can defeat a full armored company. The FPV drones, at $500 each, destroyed vehicles worth thousands of times their price. But more importantly, they exploited the specific vulnerability that the river crossing created, a column of vehicles packed together on a narrow road with no room to maneuver. Against dispersed targets in open terrain, 12 drones might achieve 3 or 4 kills. Against a stacked column on a confined approach road, 12 drones achieved near total destruction because every target was stationary, packed close to adjacent targets, and unable to reverse or disperse. The sniper, with rounds costing a few dollars each, prevented the repair of a bridge that cost over $1 million to build. His contribution cannot be measured in the material value of his targets, but in the capability he denied. Every engineer he killed or deterred was an engineer who could not restore the bridge. And every minute the bridge remained blocked was another minute that the Russian battalion spent trapped in a kill zone, bleeding vehicles and men. The psychological effect was equally significant. Russian soldiers watching their engineers being shot one by one as they approached the bridge understood viscerally that the crossing was a death trap, accelerating the collapse of morale that ultimately led to the retreat. And the machine gunners, the riflemen, the mortar teams who provided supporting fire, the platoon commander who made every tactical decision correctly from the first javelin shot to the last burst of covering fire, these soldiers proved that in this war, the human element remains the decisive factor. Technology provides capability, training provides competence, but it is the individual soldier's courage, judgment, and determination that decides how to use those capabilities, when to fire, when to hold fire, and when to hold a position that every rational calculation says he should abandon. The mud helped too. The late February thaw that turned the fields around the crossing into a quagmire of soft clay and standing water became an ally of the defenders, slowing Russian infantry to a crawl, trapping vehicles that tried to leave the road, and making every movement an exhausting struggle through ground that sucked at boots and tracks alike. The Ukrainian defenders, dug into their positions and not needing to move, were unaffected. The Russians, trying to advance through it, were helpless. 28 Ukrainian soldiers decided that a river crossing in eastern Ukraine was where they would draw the line. They arrived with 6 hours' notice, dug positions in mud, and fought for 6 hours against a force outnumbering them 14-1, a force with tanks, armored vehicles, and 400 trained soldiers. 400 Russian soldiers and 12 armored vehicles broke against that line like water against a dam and receded, leaving wreckage and bodies in the silence that follows a battle won by men who refused to yield. Ukraine fights, Ukraine holds, Ukraine defends every crossing. This is Iron Front. The battlefield speaks louder than propaganda.